The Krellian fleet hung in space like a swarm of metallic locusts, their ships stretching across the star field in numbers that defied counting. Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. The final resistance of the Galactic Coalition was about to be crushed. For 3 years, the Krellian Empire had swept across known space like a plague. World after world had fallen to their superior technology and ruthless military doctrine. The coalition forces, made up of 7 different species, had fought bravely but futilely. Their ships were outdated, their weapons primitive, and their tactics predictable. "Status report," Zethkar commanded, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. "Sir, our forces outnumber the remaining coalition fleet by 12 to 1, his tactical officer replied. "Their ships are clustered around the Viridian system, protecting the last major shipyards. Once we destroy those facilities, their ability to build new vessels will be completely eliminated." Zethkar's mandibles clicked with pleasure. The Viridians were skilled shipbuilders, and their orbital yards had been producing vessels for the Coalition at an impressive rate. But impressive wasn't enough when facing the might of the Krellian war machine. On the other side of the battle zone, Coalition Admiral Thys gripped the command chair of her flagship with trembling claws. The Altarian's blue-scaled face was tight with desperation as she watched the enemy formations advance. Her mixed fleet of Viridian cruisers, Altarian destroyers, Zenthari frigates, and ships from 4 other species looked pitifully small against the approaching armada. "Admiral, we're receiving communications from the evacuation transports," her communications officer reported. "The civilian ships are having trouble clearing the system. The Krellian advance scouts are already harassing the outer convoys." Thys closed her eyes briefly. Millions of innocent lives hung in the balance. The Viridian shipyards weren't just military installations. They were home to countless families, workers, and refugees who had already fled from other conquered systems. "How long until the main Krellian force is in weapons range?" she asked. 47 minutes, Admiral." 47 minutes to perform a miracle. Thys had studied every tactical manual, analyzed every successful defense in galactic history, but nothing prepared a commander for odds like these. The Coalition fleet had 847 ships. The Krellians were approaching with over 10,000. "Sir, incoming priority transmission from Coalition High Command," the communications officer announced. Thys straightened in her chair, put it through. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the grave face of Supreme Commander Vorak, a dignified Zenthari whose golden fur had gone gray during the war years. "Admiral Thys," Vorak began without preamble, "I'm afraid I have no reinforcements to offer you. The Krellians have moved faster than our worst projections. However, I do have some unusual news that might interest you." Thys leaned forward. "Sir." 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected something extraordinary. A fleet of unknown design has entered Coalition space from the Rim territories. The ships don't match any known configuration in our databases. Hope flickered in Thys's chest, then died quickly. "Unknown ships could be another hostile force, sir. We can't afford to." "Admiral," Vorak interrupted, "these ships destroyed a Krellian patrol fleet of 60 vessels in under 10 minutes. The engagement was so brief our sensors barely registered the conflict before it was over." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of ship systems. Thys felt her heart's racing. "Unknown capabilities, sir." "Completely unknown. But Admiral, there's something else. We've been monitoring Krellian communications, and their high command is genuinely concerned about these new arrivals. Intelligence suggests the Krellian Emperor himself has issued orders to avoid engaging these ships until they can be properly analyzed." Thys frowned. The Krellians feared nothing she'd ever encountered. Their arrogance was legendary, matched only by their military effectiveness. "Sir, do we have any idea who these ships belong to?" Vorak's expression grew troubled. "The initial reports are difficult to believe. According to our xenobiology teams analyzing the wreckage of that Krellian patrol, the weapon signatures and tactical patterns suggest the ships belong to a species we've only heard about in ancient legends." "Ancient legends." "Humans, Admiral." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Every Coalition species had stories about humans, mythical warriors from the edge of known space who had supposedly fought in the first great galactic war thousands of years ago before disappearing entirely. Most scholars considered them folklore, stories told to inspire courage in desperate times. Sir, humans are mythological, Thys protested. There's no credible evidence they ever existed. Perhaps, but 3 days ago, something destroyed 60 Krellian warships with weapons we can't identify, using tactics we've never seen. The energy signatures don't match any known species in the galactic database. Thys stared at the display, her mind racing. Even if humans were real, even if they still existed somewhere in the galaxy, what were the chances they would intervene in a war that didn't concern them? Admiral, we're detecting movement in the Krellian fleet, her tactical officer reported urgently. They're accelerating their attack schedule. Thys looked at the sensor display. The massive enemy formation was indeed moving faster than predicted, their ships forming attack wings with practiced precision. Supreme Commander, she said to Vorak's image, even if these mysterious ships exist, we have no way to contact them or request their assistance. The Krellians will reach us in 38 minutes. Vorak nodded grimly. I understand your position, Admiral. Fight as well as you can. History will remember the Coalition's final stand, even if no one survives to record it. The transmission ended, leaving Thys alone with her thoughts and her doomed fleet. She stood and walked to the main view screen, watching the distant points of light that represented the approaching enemy armada. Admiral, her first officer approached carefully, perhaps we should consider evacuation. The civilian transports could use escorts too. No, Thys said firmly. If we abandon the shipyards, the Krellians will destroy them and slaughter every refugee ship trying to escape. Our job is to buy time, not run away. She turned back to her crew, seeing the fear and determination mixed in their faces. These were brave beings from 7 different worlds, serving together in the face of certain death. All ships, this is Admiral Thys, she announced over the fleet communications channel. In 35 minutes, we face the largest enemy force any of us have ever encountered. Our fleet cannot match their numbers, their firepower, or their technology. By every logical calculation, we should surrender now and spare ourselves the pain of futile resistance. She paused, letting her words sink in. But logic has never been the strongest trait of coalition forces. We fight not because we can win, but because the alternative is watching innocent civilians die while we do nothing. Today, we stand between tyranny and freedom. Today, we prove that courage matters more than numbers. The communication channel erupted with responses from hundreds of ship captains across the fleet. Battle cries in 7 different languages filled the airwaves, creating a cacophony of defiance that sent chills down Thys's spine. All ships assume defensive formation Delta 7 around the shipyards. Heavy cruisers form the outer perimeter, destroyers and frigates provide mobile support. Fight ships to engage enemy scouts and provide early warning. As the Coalition fleet moved into position, Thys couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. Yes, they were about to be destroyed, but they would go down fighting. The Krellians would pay a price for their victory, even if it was a small one. Admiral, sensors are detecting unusual readings from the edge of the system, the tactical officer reported. Something's coming out of hyperspace. Thys's heart skipped. Krellian reinforcements. Negative, sir. The signatures are completely different. Unknown ship configurations approaching from Grid 77 Alpha. On the main screen, points of light began appearing as ships dropped out of hyperspace. But these weren't the sleek, organic curves of Krellian vessels or the familiar geometric shapes of Coalition ships. These were something else entirely, angular, aggressive designs that seemed to radiate menace even at extreme distance. How many ships? Thys asked, hardly daring to hope. Still counting, Admiral. Definitely more than 100, possibly more than 200. Admiral, I'm reading over 300 vessels of unknown configuration. The bridge crew stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. 300 ships was significant, but still far from enough to challenge the massive Krellian force. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the unknown fleet, the communications officer announced. Put it through. The holographic display activated, and for the first time in her life, Admiral Thys found herself looking at a human being. The creature was bipedal like most sentient species, but there was something unsettling about its appearance. Its skin was pale, its eyes a striking blue color that seemed to burn with inner fire. Most disturbing of all were its teeth, flat and white except for prominent canines that suggested a predatory nature. "Coalition forces," the human said in accented but clear galactic standard. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We've been monitoring your situation." This found her voice with difficulty. "Admiral Chen, I am Admiral This of the Coalition Defense Force. Are you really human?" The creature's mouth curved in what This realized was probably a smile, though it looked more like a threat display. "Guilty as charged, Admiral. My species has been watching the Krellian expansion with great interest. We've decided it's time to introduce ourselves properly." 300 ships won't be enough," This said bluntly. "The Krellians have over 10,000 vessels approaching this position." Admiral Chen's smile widened, revealing more of those predatory teeth. "Admiral This, you're thinking like prey. We prefer to think like predators. 300 human ships aren't just 300 ships. They're 300 opportunities to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten our neighbors." Before This could respond, her tactical officer gasped. "Admiral, the human ships. They're accelerating directly toward the Krellian fleet. They're not taking defensive positions, they're attacking." On the display, the human vessels had formed into tight attack formations and were racing toward the massive enemy armada at speeds that defied belief. Their approach was so fast and direct it looked almost suicidal. "Admiral Chen," This called urgently, "you need to coordinate with our defensive plan. We can't support an offensive action with these odds." "Don't worry about us, Admiral," Chen replied, his image flickering as his ship apparently entered some kind of combat mode. "Humans have been fighting impossible odds since before we had spaceships. Today, the Krellians learn why our species survived when so many others didn't." The transmission cut off, leaving This staring at the tactical display in disbelief. The human ships were still accelerating, now moving at velocities that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. "Time to engagement with human forces?" she asked. 14 minutes, Admiral. The Krellians are adjusting their formation to meet the attack." This watched the display with growing amazement. The Krellian fleet, which had seemed so confident and unstoppable moments before, was actually repositioning to deal with a force less than 3% of their size. What kind of reputation did humans have that could cause such a reaction? "Admiral," her first officer said quietly, "maybe the legends were true. Maybe humans really are what the old stories claimed." This nodded slowly. According to the ancient tales, humans were the most dangerous predator species in the galaxy, beings who had evolved on a death world so hostile that they had developed an unnatural talent for warfare and an inability to recognize impossible odds. In 13 minutes, she would find out if the legends were real. The bridge crew watched in tense silence as the two forces approached each other. In the distance, the Coalition fleet maintained its defensive position around the shipyards, suddenly feeling like spectators at their own battle. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the human ships," the tactical officer reported. "Whatever weapons they're carrying, they're unlike anything in our databases." "And the Krellians?" "They're deploying their full battle line, sir. It looks like they're taking the human threat very seriously indeed." This gripped her command chair tighter. In a few minutes, the entire war might change. Either the humans would prove themselves to be the legendary warriors of galactic folklore, or 300 brave ships would die in a futile gesture. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. The countdown continued as two fleets raced toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of billions. Admiral This had wanted a miracle, and the universe had apparently decided to give her either the greatest military legend in galactic history or the most tragic waste of life she had ever witnessed. Time would tell which it would be. The first human weapons fired at maximum range, and Admiral This immediately understood why the Krellians feared these mysterious warriors. Beams of pure energy, more intense than anything in the Coalition arsenal, lanced across space at the speed of light. But these weren't the familiar plasma bolts or particle beams that dominated galactic warfare. These were something far more destructive, focused streams of energy that seemed to tear reality itself apart at the molecular level. The leading edge of the Krellian fleet simply ceased to exist. 12 massive battleships, each capable of destroying an entire coalition squadron, were reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas in the span of 3 seconds. The energy beams didn't just damage the ships. They completely annihilated them down to the atomic level. "What kind of weapons are those?" Thys whispered, staring at the tactical display in shock. Her science officer was frantically running calculations on his instruments. "Admiral, the energy output readings are off our scales. Those beams are generating more power than our entire fleet combined. It's like they're channeling the energy of a small star." Admiral Zethkar aboard the Krellian flagship was experiencing similar disbelief. His species had conquered 17 different civilizations, each time using their superior technology to overwhelm any resistance. But these human weapons were beyond anything in the Krellian arsenal. "Damage report," he demanded. "Sir, we've lost 12 battleships with no survivors. The human weapons appear to be some form of antimatter projection system, but the power requirements should be impossible for ships that size." Zethkar's tactical display showed the human fleet continuing its charge toward his forces. The vessels were moving in perfect coordination, their formations shifting and flowing like a school of deadly fish. Most disturbing of all, they showed no signs of slowing down despite being vastly outnumbered. "Deploy the graviton mines," he ordered. "If their ships are moving that fast, they won't be able to avoid a gravity well trap." The Krellian fleet launched thousands of graviton mines, devices that created artificial gravity fields strong enough to trap even the most maneuverable vessels. It was a standard tactic against aggressive attackers, and it had never failed to stop an enemy advance. Admiral Chen watched the mine deployment with cold calculation. "Tactical, evaluate enemy mine field." "Sir, detecting standard graviton mines with enhanced yield. Approximately 8,000 devices deployed in overlapping pattern. Recommended course change to avoid gravity wells." Chen's smile was sharp and predatory. "Negative. Maintain current course and speed. Activate inertial dampeners to maximum and prepare kinetic bombardment." "Sir, the inertial dampeners alone won't be enough to." "Follow your orders," Chen said calmly. The human fleet plowed directly into the graviton mine field at full speed. But instead of being trapped by the artificial gravity wells, something extraordinary happened. The human ships seemed to slide through the gravitational distortions like they weren't even there, their hulls glowing with an energy field that neutralized the mine effects. "Impossible," Zethkar breathed. "Nothing can ignore graviton mines at that velocity." But his tactical officer had worse news. "Sir, the human ships are launching projectiles, thousands of them all on ballistic trajectories toward our fleet." On the tactical display, clouds of small objects were streaming from the human vessels. At first glance, they looked like standard missiles, but their flight patterns were all wrong. They weren't seeking targets or making course corrections. They were just flying in perfectly straight lines at incredible velocity. "Point defense systems, engage incoming missiles," Zethkar commanded. The Krellian fleet opened fire with millions of defensive weapons, creating a wall of energy designed to intercept any incoming attack. But when the defensive fire hit the human projectiles, something unexpected happened. Instead of exploding or being destroyed, the projectiles simply absorbed the energy and kept flying. "Sir, our point defense isn't affecting them," the tactical officer reported in growing panic. "The projectiles appear to be solid metal, moving at approximately 15% of light speed." Zethkar felt a chill run down his spine. Solid metal projectiles moving at relativistic speeds weren't sophisticated weapons. They were the simplest form of kinetic bombardment possible. But at those velocities, they carried more destructive power than most energy weapons. The first wave of kinetic projectiles reached the Krellian fleet, and the results were devastating. Each solid metal rod, no bigger than a torpedo, struck with the force of a tactical nuclear weapon. Krellian shields, designed to deflect energy attacks, were completely useless against simple mass moving at impossible speeds. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light as the kinetic rounds punched through their hulls like tissue paper. Even glancing hits were catastrophic, the impact forces tearing apart vessel after vessel with ruthless efficiency. "Evasive maneuvers," Zethkar shouted. "Scatter formation." But the human attack was far from over. As the Krellian fleet tried to disperse, the human ships suddenly changed tactics. Instead of maintaining their long-range bombardment, they accelerated even faster and closed to point-blank range with shocking speed. Admiral Thys watched in amazement as the human fleet dove directly into the heart of the Krellian formation. It was the most aggressive military maneuver she had ever witnessed. 300 ships willingly entering close combat with an enemy force 30 times their size. "They're completely insane," her first officer muttered. "No," Thys corrected, watching the tactical display with growing understanding. "They're predators. They're not thinking about odds or tactics. They're thinking about killing." At close range, the human weapons became even more terrifying. The energy beams that had annihilated the first Krellian ships were joined by new horrors: plasma cannons that fired streams of stellar temperature matter, particle accelerators that literally tore enemy ships apart atom by atom, and something the Coalition sensors couldn't even classify that simply made Krellian vessels disappear entirely. But the most frightening aspect of the human attack wasn't their weapons. It was their complete lack of fear. Coalition military doctrine emphasized survival, tactical withdrawal when outnumbered, and preserving forces for future engagements. Krellian doctrine focused on overwhelming firepower and technological superiority. Human doctrine, as demonstrated in this battle, was apparently based on the simple principle of killing everything in sight as quickly and efficiently as possible. "Admiral Chen to all human vessels," came a transmission that the Coalition fleet was somehow able to intercept. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves today. Every Krellian ship we destroy saves millions of innocent lives. Show them what humans do to bullies." The response from the human fleet was a wordless roar of aggression that sent chills through every Coalition bridge officer who heard it. These weren't just soldiers following orders. They were predators expressing their natural instincts. The battle devolved into a chaotic melee as human ships weaved through the Krellian formation with impossible agility. Their vessels moved like living creatures, dodging incoming fire with fluid grace while simultaneously targeting multiple enemies with lethal precision. Zethkar found himself facing a tactical situation he had never imagined. His fleet still outnumbered the humans by massive margins, but individual human ships were proving capable of destroying multiple Krellian vessels before being brought down. Worse, the human attack patterns showed no regard for conventional military logic. "Sir, the humans are using ramming attacks," his tactical officer reported in disbelief. "3 of their ships just collided with our battleships at full speed." "Intentional ramming." "Yes, sir, they're treating their own ships as kinetic weapons." Zethkar stared at the tactical display, trying to comprehend an enemy that was willing to sacrifice their own vessels to destroy his. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered a species so utterly devoted to warfare that they would throw away their own lives without hesitation. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy buildups from the remaining human ships," came another frantic report. "They appear to be preparing to self-destruct." Before Zethkar could respond, the first human ship exploded, but not in the random burst of a damaged reactor. This was a controlled detonation designed to maximize destruction to surrounding enemies. The explosion tore apart 4 Krellian cruisers and crippled 2 more. "They're turning themselves into bombs," the tactical officer whispered. Across the battle zone, more human ships began detonating themselves whenever they were too damaged to continue fighting. Each explosion was carefully timed and positioned to cause maximum casualties among the Krellian fleet. Admiral Thys watched the carnage with a mixture of horror and awe. The humans were fighting with a level of ruthless determination that defied all logic. They weren't just willing to die for victory, they were eager to die if it meant taking more enemies with them. "Admiral," her science officer called urgently, "I'm reading massive casualties in the Krellian fleet. They've lost over 2,000 ships." "In how long?" 18 minutes, sir." Thys felt her legs go weak. 2,000 Krellian ships destroyed in 18 minutes by a force of 300 human vessels. It was impossible, but the sensor readings didn't lie. On his flagship, Admiral Zethkar was reaching the same conclusion. His massive armada, which had seemed invincible just minutes before, was being systematically destroyed by enemies who fought like demons from the ancient legends. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human commander." "Put it through," Zethkar said grimly. Admiral Chen's image appeared on the display, but he looked different now. His uniform was torn. There was blood on his face from what appeared to be battle damage. and his eyes burned with an intensity that made Zethkar's skin crawl. "Admiral Zethkar," Chen said, somehow knowing exactly who he was addressing. "I am Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have approximately 147 functional ships remaining out of your original force of 10,038 vessels." The precision of those numbers hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The human had been keeping an exact count of Krellian casualties while in the middle of a furious battle. "Impossible," Zethkar managed. Chen's smile was the most frightening thing the Krellian admiral had ever seen. "Your species made a mistake, Admiral. You assumed that conquest was about technology and numbers. You forgot that at its core, war is about violence, and humans are very, very good at violence." "What do you want?" Zethkar asked. "I want you to deliver a message to your emperor," Chen replied. "Tell him that humanity is back, and we remember what his species did to the Centauri colonies 3 years ago. Tell him that we've marked every world the Krellians have conquered, and we're coming to take them back." "You can't fight the entire Krellian Empire with 300 ships," Zethkar protested. Chen's smile widened. "Admiral, you just lost over 2,000 ships to 93 human vessels. Do you really want to find out what we can do when we bring our full fleet?" The transmission cut off, leaving Zethkar staring at a tactical display that showed the impossible truth. 93 human ships were all that remained of the original 300, but they had destroyed over 20% of his entire fleet in less than half an hour. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "recommend immediate withdrawal. If we stay, they'll destroy us all." Zethkar looked at the display one more time, seeing his once mighty armada reduced to scattered survivors. The humans had done more than defeat him. They had shattered the myth of Krellian invincibility. "All ships," he commanded with a heavy heart, "prepare for immediate hyperspace jump. Emergency evacuation of all forces." The surviving Krellian ships began jumping to hyperspace as quickly as their drives could cycle. Within minutes, the massive invasion fleet had fled the system, leaving behind only wreckage and the legends of the day 93 human ships defeated an armada. Admiral Thiss watched the enemy retreat in stunned silence. The coalition fleet hadn't fired a single shot, but they had witnessed the most one-sided military victory in galactic history. "Admiral Chen," she called on the communications channel, "this is Admiral Thiss. Can you hear me?" The human admiral's battered face appeared on her screen, but his expression had softened slightly now that the battle was over. "Admiral Thiss," he said with obvious exhaustion, "sorry we couldn't save more of your people. We're still learning to work with allied forces." Thiss shook her head in amazement. "Admiral, you just saved billions of lives. The coalition owes humanity a debt we can never repay." Chen's response surprised her. "Admiral, humanity doesn't want payment. We want allies. The galaxy is full of bullies like the Krellians, and someone needs to teach them that their victims aren't as helpless as they think." As the surviving human ships began regrouping, Thiss realized that everything had changed. The coalition wasn't defenseless anymore. They had allies now, allies who fought with a ferocity that made their enemies flee in terror. The age of Krellian expansion was over. The age of human intervention had begun. 6 months after the Battle of Viridian, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Admiral Thiss stood in the command center of the new Coalition Terran Joint Operations Base, watching holographic displays that showed human fleets moving across known space like avenging angels. The Krellian Empire, which had seemed unstoppable for 3 years, was collapsing faster than anyone had thought possible. World after world was being liberated by combined human coalition forces, and the legendary Krellian war machine was proving to be no match for humanity's apparently unlimited appetite for violence. "Admiral, incoming report from the Altair sector," her aide announced. "Admiral Chen's Third Fleet has completed liberation of the Zenthari homeworld. Krellian casualties estimated at 12,000 ships with 0 human losses." This shook her head in amazement. 0 human losses was becoming a common phrase in military reports, and it never failed to astonish her. Human ships didn't just win battles. They won them so decisively that the enemy rarely managed to inflict any damage in return. "Any word on the Krellian response?" she asked. "Intelligence reports suggest their high command is in complete disarray, sir. They've lost over 40% of their total fleet strength in 6 months, and their remaining forces are spread too thin to defend their core territories. This walked to the main viewing window, looking out at the mixed fleet of coalition and human vessels orbiting the station. The two forces made for an interesting contrast. Coalition ships were elegant and efficient, designed by species that valued beauty and functionality in equal measure. Human ships looked like they had been built in the foundries of hell, all sharp angles and aggressive lines that promised death to anyone foolish enough to oppose them. But the most remarkable thing about the alliance wasn't the difference in ship design. It was how quickly the two forces had learned to work together. Coalition commanders provided strategic intelligence and logistical support, while human commanders provided the raw firepower needed to crush any resistance. It was a partnership that played to each side's strengths. "Admiral Thiss," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, looking far better than he had during that first desperate battle. His uniform was crisp and clean, his wounds had healed, but his eyes still held that predatory intensity that made him so effective in combat. "Admiral Chen," she replied with genuine warmth, "I heard about your success at Zenthar. Congratulations on another flawless victory." Chen's expression grew troubled. "Actually, Admiral, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. We need to talk about the long-term implications of this campaign." This gestured toward her private office, and the two admirals walked inside. The room was decorated with battle honors from 7 coalition species, creating a display that represented the diversity of their alliance. "What's troubling you?" Thiss asked as they sat down. Chen leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "Admiral, in the past 6 months, human forces have destroyed over 50,000 Krellian ships and liberated 234 worlds. We've crippled an empire that ruled a third of the galaxy." "That's exactly what we hoped you would do," Thiss said, confused by his tone. "The problem is what comes next," Chen explained. "The Krellian Empire is collapsing, but nature abhors a vacuum. When their government falls completely, we're going to have hundreds of worlds with no infrastructure, no leadership, and no way to defend themselves." Thiss frowned. "The coalition can help establish provisional governments and provide aid for reconstruction." "With what resources?" Chen asked pointedly. "Admiral, the coalition was barely surviving before we arrived. Your industrial capacity is a fraction of what it was before the war began. You don't have the ships, personnel, or economic infrastructure to govern half the galaxy." The uncomfortable truth of that statement settled over both admirals. Thiss had been so focused on winning the war that she hadn't fully considered the challenges of winning the peace. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Chen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mixed fleet. "Admiral, my species has a saying, be careful what you wish for because you might get it. 6 months ago, you wanted to stop Krellian expansion. Now we've done that, but in the process, we've accidentally conquered most of their territory ourselves." "Human forces aren't occupying liberated worlds," Thiss protested. "Not officially," Chen agreed. "But when human fleets are the only thing standing between a liberated world and chaos, what's the practical difference? We've become the de facto rulers of 300-star systems, whether we wanted to or not." The implications hit Thiss like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't set out to conquer the galaxy, but their overwhelming military success had created a power vacuum that only they could fill. "What does Earth want to do about this situation?" she asked carefully. Chen turned back to face her, and his expression was more serious than she had ever seen it. "Admiral, I think it's time you learned the truth about humanity. We're not the legendary warriors from your ancient folklore." "What do you mean?" Chen activated a holographic display showing star charts from the rim territories where humanity had first appeared. "Admiral, 3 years ago, humans weren't even a spacefaring species. We had barely colonized our own solar system when Krellian scouts discovered Earth." This stared at him in shock. "That's impossible. Your technology, your ships, your weapons, they're decades ahead of anything in the galaxy." "They are now," Chen confirmed. "But 3 years ago, our most advanced warship was a patrol cutter that would barely qualify as a cargo shuttle by galactic standards." "Then how?" Chen's smile was grim. "Admiral, do you know what the Krellians did when they discovered Earth? They didn't offer trade agreements or diplomatic contact. They didn't study our culture or try to understand our society. They decided that humans would make excellent slave labor for their industrial worlds, so they invaded." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The first Krellian raid captured 50,000 humans from our outer colonies, Chen continued. The second raid took 200,000 more. By the time they finished their recruitment operations, they had enslaved over 3 million of my people. This felt sick. I had no idea. The coalition didn't know because Earth was outside your territory, and the Krellians classified it as an internal matter, Chen explained. But Admiral enslaving humans turned out to be the worst mistake in Krellian history. Why? Chen walked over to a wall display that showed images of human colonies. Because slavery doesn't work on predator species, Admiral. You can intimidate prey animals into submission, but when you try to enslave a predator, you just make them angry. The display changed to show images of massive industrial complexes that looked more like fortresses than factories. The enslaved humans didn't just escape. They took over entire Krellian industrial worlds. They turned mining equipment into weapons, factory systems into shipbuilding facilities, and transport networks into military infrastructure. They built a fleet from captured territory. They built the most advanced fleet in galactic history, Chen corrected. Admiral, humans might be newcomers to space travel, but we have one advantage that no other species in the galaxy can match. Which is? Chen's predatory smile returned. We're the only species that evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us. Earth isn't just a harsh world, it's a death world that produced the most dangerous predator in the galaxy. When humans are pushed into a corner, we don't just fight back. We innovate, we adapt, and we become more dangerous than whatever was threatening us. The holographic display showed technical diagrams of human weapons and ship designs. This studied them with growing amazement, seeing technology that was decades beyond anything in her experience. This is all human innovation, she asked. Developed in less than 3 years, Chen confirmed. Admiral, when the Krellians enslaved my people, they accidentally gave humans access to galactic technology and industrial capacity. We reverse-engineered everything they had, improved it beyond recognition, and then used it to build a fleet specifically designed to destroy their empire. But the ancient legends about human warriors. Pure coincidence, Chen said. Your ancient stories probably describe some other species entirely. But when we appeared with our new fleet and started destroying Krellian forces, it was easy for Coalition intelligence to assume we were the legendary humans from the old tailies. This sat back in her chair, trying to process everything she had learned. So humanity went from a pre-spaceflight civilization to the most powerful military force in the galaxy in just 3 years. That's correct. And Admiral, that brings us back to the original problem. We never wanted to conquer the galaxy. We just wanted to rescue our people and punish the Krellians for enslaving them. But now we have the largest fleet in known space and control over hundreds of star systems. Chen activated another display showing the current political situation across the galaxy. The question is, what do we do with all this power? Humanity could easily establish an empire larger than the Krellians ever dreamed of. We could rule the galaxy through pure military force. Will you? Thys asked quietly. Chen's answer surprised her. Admiral, humans learned something important during our years of slavery. Power without justice is just tyranny. We didn't fight this war to replace one empire with another. Then what do you want? Chen gestured toward the window where Coalition and human ships flew together in formation. We want to build something better. An alliance where multiple species work together as equals, where no single power can dominate the others, and where predators like the Krellians can never again threaten peaceful civilizations. This felt hope stirring in her chest. A true galactic coalition. Exactly. The coalition already has the political framework and diplomatic experience. Humanity can provide the military strength needed to enforce peace and protect smaller civilizations. Together, we could create a galactic government based on cooperation rather than conquest. The idea was ambitious beyond anything Thys had ever imagined, but the past 6 months had taught her not to underestimate human ambitions. What about the liberated Krellian worlds? Joint administration, Chen suggested. Coalition civilian governments with human military protection. We help them rebuild their societies while making sure they're never again vulnerable to conquest. And the remaining Krellian forces. Chen's smile turned predatory again. Admiral, there are still several million enslaved humans in Krellian territory. Until every single one of them is free, the war isn't over. This nodded, understanding the implication. Humanity wouldn't stop fighting until their people were safe, and given their track record, that meant the complete destruction of whatever remained of the Krellian Empire. "When do we begin?" she asked. "The planning starts now," Chen replied. "But Admiral, I want you to understand something important. This alliance will only work if it's truly equal. Humans might have the strongest military, but we're also the newest members of galactic civilization. We need coalition wisdom, experience, and cultural knowledge to avoid making terrible mistakes." This stood and extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement she had learned to appreciate. "Admiral Chen, the coalition accepts humanity as equal partners in building this new galactic order." Chen shook her hand firmly. "Then let's get to work, Admiral. We have a galaxy to rebuild." As the two admirals began planning the future of galactic civilization, neither of them noticed the small display in the corner of the room showing current military reports. The latest message was simple but significant. Krellian Emperor confirms unconditional surrender. All enslaved populations to be released immediately. Krellian military forces ordered to stand down pending peace negotiations. The war was over. Humanity had not only rescued their enslaved people, they had accidentally liberated the galaxy. What came next would determine whether their victory would lead to lasting peace or simply create new conflicts. But looking at the two admirals working together to plan a better future, there was reason for optimism. After all, if humans could go from enslaved prisoners to galactic liberators in 3 years, there was no telling what they might accomplish with willing allies and unlimited time. The age of empire was ending. The age of cooperation was about to begin. Outside the station windows, human and coalition ships flew together in perfect formation, their combined fleet patrolling space that had been controlled by tyrants just months before. It was a sight that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago, but had become as natural as the stars themselves. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Never underestimate the species that fights hardest when backed into a corner. Humanity had been pushed to the edge of extinction and had responded by becoming the most powerful force in known space. Now they faced their greatest challenge yet, learning to use that power wisely. The future of galactic civilization hung in the balance, but for the first time in years, that future looked bright.